I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I stood at the edge of my daughter's grave in a grey February drizzle, and I felt nothing but a cold, clean stillness, the kind that comes right before you understand something terrible. People kept squeezing my shoulder and telling me she was at peace now. I nodded. I let them think I believed it. But inside me a small voice had already begun whispering that something was wrong, and I had spent 40 years as a hospice nurse learning never to ignore that voice. My name doesn't matter much anymore. What matters is that my daughter was 34 years old, that she had run 3 miles every morning since high school, that she had no heart condition anyone had ever heard of, and that the coroner's office had written sudden cardiac event on the paperwork, as casually as you'd write a grocery list. I signed where they told me to sign. I drove home to an empty house in Cedar Falls, and I sat in the dark and I did not cry, because crying felt like agreeing with them, and I did not agree. 3 days after we buried her, the pharmacist called me. I almost didn't pick up. The number wasn't saved, and I'd been ignoring everyone, even the church ladies dropping off casseroles I'd never eat. But something made me answer that afternoon, and the voice on the other end was a young man, nervous, talking too fast. Is this the mother of the woman who passed last week? The one whose prescriptions I filled? I said it was. Ma'am, I'm not supposed to call you. I could lose my license for this, but I've been sick about it for 3 days and I can't keep quiet. He took a breath. You need to come down here. There's something I have to show you. And please, please don't tell your son-in-law. Don't tell anyone in the family. Just come alone. My hands went very still on the steering wheel of my parked car. I asked him what this was about. Not over the phone, he said. Please. Come now, before my shift ends at 6. I went straight there. The pharmacy was one of those little independent ones tucked into a strip mall off Route 9, the kind that's been hanging on for 30 years while the chain stores swallow everything around it. I've been going there since my daughter was a baby. The young man, the new pharmacist, met me at the counter and his face was the color of paper. He led me into the back, past the shelves of amber bottles, to a cramped little office with a computer screen. He pulled up her record. My daughter's name sat there at the top, and under it a list of every prescription she'd ever filled at that location. I started here in November, he said quietly. When I take over a patient file, I review the history, and hers stopped me cold. He pointed at the screen with a shaking finger. 3 months ago, somebody started filling a prescription in her name. Digoxin. It's a heart medication. Very powerful. In the wrong dose, it stops your heart entirely. He looked at me. Mom, your daughter never had a heart condition. There's no doctor's note in her file that justifies this. And the refills weren't picked up by her. They were picked up by a man. He showed her insurance card and ID every time. Same man. 3 times. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. I heard myself ask, in a voice that didn't sound like mine, what the man looked like. The pharmacist described him. Tall, beard, drove a silver pickup with a dealership sticker still on the back window. And then he said the thing that made the floor tilt under me. He came in 2 days after she died. He picked up the last refill, then he asked me to delete the prescription history. Said it was a privacy thing, that the family was grieving and didn't need reminders. The young man swallowed. I told him I couldn't do that without paperwork. He got angry. He left. But I didn't delete anything. And then I saw the funeral notice in the paper and He stopped. I think you need to know what I know. I knew the truck. I knew the beard. I knew the man. My son-in-law. Now I have to tell you about him, because if you only know the ending, you'll think I'm a foolish old woman who jumped to conclusions. He wasn't a monster on the outside. That's the thing nobody warns you about. He was charming the way a good salesman is charming, and he was a salesman. Cars mostly, then boats, then something in investments that he never explained well. When my daughter brought him home 8 years ago, I liked him. God help me, I liked him. He fixed my gutters without being asked. He called me by a nickname. He remembered my birthday when my own brother forgot it. But I'd spent 4 decades sitting at the bedsides of the dying, and the dying tell you the truth about people because they've got nothing left to protect. I learned to read the small things. The way a husband checks his watch while his wife is mid-sentence. The way a man's grief sounds rehearsed. At the funeral, my son-in-law had wept beautifully, theatrically, dabbing his eyes in front of every relative who watched. And once, when he thought no one was looking, I saw him check his phone and almost smile. I drove home from that pharmacy and I did not call the police. I want you to understand why. Because the comments people leave when they hear stories like mine always ask the same thing. Why didn't she just call 911? Why didn't she record it? Why didn't she record it? Why didn't she protect herself? And the honest answer is that I was a 63-year-old widow with no badge and no proof except a pharmacy record that any lawyer could explain away in an afternoon. A privacy-conscious husband picking up his sick wife's medication. That's all it looked like on paper. I needed more. I needed him to hand me the rest of it himself. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went quiet and I went careful and I started keeping a record. The first thing I did the next morning was call the pharmacist back and ask him to print everything. The dates, the dosages, the signatures on the pickup log. He hesitated. Then he printed it and handed me the pages in a manila envelope and told me to please leave his name out of it if I could. I promised him I would, and I have kept that promise until this very telling, where I still won't say it. The second thing I did was go to my daughter's house. He was at work selling somebody a truck. I still had the key she'd given me years ago, for emergencies, for watering plants. I let myself in, and I stood in the living room where I'd held her as a baby and rocked her to sleep, and I made myself breathe. Then I went to work the way I'd worked 100 death scenes as a nurse, methodically, touching nothing I didn't have to. I found the life insurance policy in the second drawer of his desk. $400,000 on my daughter's life with a double indemnity clause for accidental or natural death. The policy had been increased. I could see the original amount crossed out 11 months ago. From $100,000 to $400,000. I sat down hard in his desk chair. Then I found the bank statements, and the bank statements told the rest of it. He was drowning. There were cash withdrawals every Friday, big ones, the kind a man makes when he owes money to people who don't take checks. There were 3 credit cards maxed out. There was a second mortgage on the house my daughter thought they owned outright. And there was a letter, folded small, from a man who signed only with initials, reminding my son-in-law in very polite language that the deadline had passed and that arrangements would have to be made. The deadline in that letter was January 30th. My daughter died on February 2nd. I want to tell you that finding all of this made me feel vindicated. It didn't. It made me feel like the floor of the world had dropped away. Because now I understood the shape of it. He'd married a healthy young woman, taken out a fortune in insurance on her life, gotten himself buried in debt to men who hurt people, and then, when the clock ran out, he'd found a way to make my daughter's heart simply stop one ordinary morning in a way no one would ever question. The digoxin builds up. A little extra each day slipped into the protein shake she drank after her run, the shake he always made for her because he was such a thoughtful husband. By the time it killed her, it would look exactly like what they wrote on the paperwork, a sudden cardiac event. A tragedy. A grieving widower collecting a check. I photographed every document with my phone, put everything back exactly where it had been, and let myself out. For 2 weeks I said nothing. I went to the casseroles. I let him hug me at the wheel reading. I watched him perform his grief, and I performed mine back at him. And I learned something about myself I'm not proud of, which is that I am a very good liar when my child's life has been taken from me. He even started talking about the insurance money. For the funeral costs, he said, and to help me get back on my feet. He had no idea I'd seen the policy. He had no idea I'd seen anything. But 2 weeks of pharmacy records and bank statements still wasn't enough. A clever lawyer could untangle every thread of it. The insurance is just a coincidence. The debt is private. The medication, well, maybe she was taking it secretly and he didn't know. I needed him to say it. I needed his own voice admitting what he'd done, and I needed it caught in a way that no courtroom could dismiss. This is the part where the comments always say I was reckless, and maybe I was. But I wasn't stupid. I was a nurse, not a fool. Before I did anything, I went to the county sheriff's office, and I asked to speak with a detective in person, and I laid the manila envelope and the photographs on his desk. He was a tired-looking man near my own age, and he listened, and at the end he sighed and told me what I already knew, that it was suggestive but not sufficient, that they could open an inquiry, but that bodies of the recently buried don't get exhumed on a mother's hunch, that without a confession or a confirmed toxicology they had nothing that would survive a defense attorney. So I asked him a question. I asked him whether, if I were to have a conversation with my son-in-law and if that conversation happened to be recorded, it would be admissible. In our state, only one party needs to consent to a recording. The detective looked at me for a long moment. Then he told me, very carefully, that he was not advising me to put myself in danger, that a wide confrontation was police work and not the work of a grieving mother. But he also told me that if a recording were to come into his possession lawfully, he could not in good conscience ignore it. And then he gave me his direct cell number and made me promise to call it the second I felt unsafe. He even arranged, without quite saying so, for a patrol car to be parked one street over on the evening I told him I planned to invite my son-in-law for dinner. I bought a small recorder. I am old enough that I trust a dedicated device more than a phone, and I put it in the breast pocket of my cardigan, and I tested it 11 times until I was sure. I left my phone propped on the kitchen windowsill with the camera running too, angled at the table, because 40 years of charting taught me that you document everything twice. And I cooked his favorite meal, because the way to get a confident man to talk is to make him comfortable, and nothing makes a man more comfortable than being fed by a woman he believes he has fooled. He came at 7. He brought flowers. He kissed my cheek and said it smelled like Christmas in here. And I smiled and told him to sit, that we needed to talk about my daughter, about her things, about the future. I poured him a glass of wine. I let him eat. I let him relax. And then, somewhere between the pot roast and the pie, I set the manila envelope on the table between us, and I watched his fork stop halfway to his mouth. "What's this?" he said. I told him I'd been to the pharmacy. I told him I'd seen the records. I told him I knew about the digoxin, and the insurance, and the debt, and the letter with the deadline. I said all of it in the flat, steady voice I used to use when I told families their loved one had hours left. The voice that doesn't flinch. I expected him to deny it. I'd prepared for that. What I didn't expect was the way his face changed, not into shock, not into the wounded outrage of an innocent man, but into something colder and more tired, like a man setting down a heavy bag he's been carrying too long. He leaned back in the chair. He looked at me almost with relief. "You're not going to be able to prove anything," he said quietly. I asked him why he did it, and he told me. God forgive me, he told me everything because I think some part of him had wanted to say it out loud for months, and because he was certain it was just the two of us in that kitchen, and that an old woman's word against his would never hold. He told me about the men he owed, men who'd made it clear that the debt would be paid one way or another, with money or with consequences he didn't want to imagine. He told me about the night he sat at his computer and realized the insurance was worth more than she was. That's how he said it. Worth more than she was, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from coming across it at him. He told me about the dose, a little at a time, in the shake. He told me he'd watched her get tired, get short of breath, and tell herself she just needed more sleep. He told me he'd held her hand the morning it finally happened and felt nothing but the math working out at last. She trusted me, he said, and he almost laughed. That was the easy part. She never once thought to wonder. I asked him if he felt anything at all. He said he felt like a man who'd run out of options and found the only door left open. He said, I'd understand if I were drowning. He said it the way you'd explain a difficult business decision. Then he reached across the table and he took the envelope, and he said that this, the records, all of it, was going into the fireplace tonight, and that I was going to keep my mouth shut because I was an old woman living alone, and accidents happen to old women living alone. And wouldn't it be a shame if the same family lost 2 people in 1 month? He said it smiling. He said it the way he'd once offered to fix my gutters. That was the moment the back door opened. The detective had heard enough. He'd been in my mudroom for the last 20 minutes, listening to every word through the recorder's live feed, which I'd quietly arranged that afternoon when I'd called to tell him the dinner was set. My son-in-law had been so busy savoring his own cleverness that he never heard the car, never heard the door, never imagined that the harmless old woman feeding him pie had spent the entire meal documenting his confession 3 different ways. He stood up so fast his chair fell over. The flowers he'd brought spilled across the floor. And the last thing he said as the detective read him his rights was my name. Not a curse, not a plea, just my name, in a voice of pure astonishment, like he was only just now seeing me for the first time. The trial took 14 months. They exhumed her. The toxicology came back exactly as I knew it would. The recording was played in open court, and a jury of 12 people listened to a man explain, in his own calm voice, why his wife was worth more dead than alive, and it took them less than 4 hours to decide. He is in a state facility now, and he will be an old man before he sees a road that doesn't have a fence beside it, if he ever does. People ask me if I feel better. I don't know how to answer that. My daughter is still gone. The house she thought she owned was sold to pay his debts. Some mornings I still set 2 coffee cups out of habit before I remember. There is no version of this where I win, because the only thing I ever wanted was her, alive, calling me on a Sunday to complain about her week, and that is the one thing no verdict could ever give me back. But I'll tell you what I did get. I got the truth, dragged into the light where he couldn't bury it under paperwork and charm. I got to sit in that courtroom and watch every relative who'd squeezed my shoulder at the funeral finally understand what I'd known since I stood in the rain at her grave. And I got the small, cold satisfaction of knowing that the last thing he ever underestimated in this world was a tired old woman in a cardigan who refused to look away. If you take anything from an old woman who has buried more than she ever thought she could survive, let it be this. When someone you love dies and a voice deep inside you whispers that something is wrong, do not let them shame that voice into silence. Do not let your grief make you agreeable. The people who hurt the ones we love are counting on us to be too broken to look closely. Look closely anyway. Ask the questions that make people uncomfortable. Keep the records. Trust the part of you that knows. I was wrong about a great many things in my long life. I was wrong about him. But I was not wrong about that voice. And it was that voice, in the end, that spoke for my daughter when she no longer could. I keep her photograph on the mantel now, in the spot where he wanted to burn the truth. Every evening I tell her good night. And every evening, in the quiet of a house that is mine again, I tell her that her mother heard her, that her mother believed her, and that her mother did not in the end look away. I still keep her photograph on the mantel, in the exact spot where my son-in-law promised me he'd burn the truth. And some nights I sit across from it and try to understand how a man who fixed my gutters could weigh my daughter's life against a number on an insurance policy and decide the number won. The answer, I've come to believe, is that every choice we make quietly builds the person we become. He didn't wake up one morning a killer. He let one small dishonesty lead to a bigger one. Let one unpaid debt become a habit of taking the easy door instead of the right one, until the only door left was the unforgivable one. Cause and effect. We like to think the terrible things happen all at once, but they don't. They're assembled piece by piece, out of 1,000 moments where a person chose comfort over conscience. What saved my daughter's memory wasn't luck. It was the part of me that refused to sign agreeing to a lie just because the lie was easier to carry. I think there are 3 things that hold a person upright when grief is trying to fold them in half. The first is a refusal to look away from what's wrong, even when looking away would let you sleep at night. Call it the simple decision to be honest with yourself about what you see. The second is the patience to think instead of react. If I had stormed into that pharmacy screaming or called my son-in-law that first night and accused him, he'd have burned every record and I'd have nothing but a broken heart and a story no one believed. Instead, I went slow. I gathered. I went to the detective before I went to the kitchen table. I used my head when my heart was begging me to scream. And the third thing is the plain stubbornness to keep standing when everything in you wants to lie down. A 63-year-old widow has every excuse in the world to let the paperwork stand and the grief swallow her whole. I didn't. Not because I was strong by nature, but because I decided one morning at a time to put one foot in front of the other until the truth had nowhere left to hide. If I could reach through this screen and tell you one thing, it would be that these are not gifts some people are born with and others aren't. They're muscles. You build them by using them in small ways long before the day you'll need them. Be honest in the little things so you'll know how when it costs you. Think clearly when it's only a parking dispute so you can think clearly when it's your child's life. Keep going on the ordinary hard days so your legs remember how on the impossible ones. My daughter is gone and no verdict will bring her back. But she was not erased and she was not forgotten. And the man who tried to do both is behind a fence now. And that happened because an old woman in a cardigan chose, again and again, not to look away.